You're watching CP24. It's 12 noon. Toronto is in the grips of a snap transit strike after TTC workers turned thumbs down on a tentative contract. The buses stopped rolling at midnight, along with streetcars and subway trains. Members of the Amalgamated Transit Union rejected the tentative deal by a vote of 65%, stranding thousands of riders who did not expect the sudden walkout. The union has said it will hold a meeting to decide on its next step. A mediator is calling on both sides to return to the bargaining table as early as 1 o'clock this afternoon. Mayor David Miller has asked Premier Dalton McGuinty for back-to-work legislation at the first available opportunity, and McGuinty has indicated that he will. We spoke by phone earlier with TTC Chair Adam Giambrone, who suggests there may be more to this dispute than just the contract.
A lot of this was, I suspect, not as much about specific issues in the contract, but about other things that were happening at the TTC. We will take a look at these things and do our best, but I don't think the only issue here is money. I think there are other issues at stake. We will do our best to work with the Ministry of Labour and to reach a negotiated settlement.
Would it be fair to say, Adam, that you suspect that this is really just the union's members saying we don't want Bob Kinnear as our head any longer?
Look, I don't know enough, Anne, about what is going on in the ATU 113. That's something that you probably have to talk to some union members about. They'd have a better sense. We've been focused on, of course, getting the system shut down over the last 12 hours, making sure there was an orderly shutdown, and that happened. Torontonians and TTC riders, while incredibly frustrated, no doubt, responded very well. And we had very few incidents of any problems, and almost all of the buses and streetcars came into the garage with no problems.
Union boss Bob Kinnear issued this statement last night. In his words, Bob says, "We have assessed the situation and decided that we will not expose our members to the dangers of assaults from angry and irrational members of the public." He continues, "The reports from our members of increases in threats and abuse from passengers last weekend, after we gave our original 48 hours notice, left us no choice but to withdraw our services immediately. We have a legal responsibility to protect the safety of our members, and so does the TTC." We have breaking news. There is word that Premier Dalton McGuinty is recalling the legislature for tomorrow to deal with the sudden TTC strike. The Premier has said he will move as quickly as possible to end the strike with back-to-work legislation after a request for that from Mayor David Miller. If the legislation gets passed in time, buses, streetcars and subways could be rolling again as early as Monday. With the very latest on the talks, we go live to the Sheraton Parkway in Richmond Hill. CP24's Melissa Grello. And Melissa, I understand the union executive was meeting and that possibly the two sides might be sitting across from the bargaining table as early as 1 o'clock this afternoon.
Okay, well, yes, that's exactly it. Let me break it down for you. Actually, we just bumped into not too long ago, about 40 minutes ago, the Chief General Manager, Gary Webster, which we know has been on the other side of the bargaining table representing the Commission in the negotiations that were happening with the TTC union in this very place last Saturday. Now, we saw him in the lobby. He said basically he is very, very disappointed. So at least we know that he is arriving ahead of that 1 o'clock scheduled meeting. That is when the provincial mediators have called for all sides to reconvene at the negotiating table. Prior to all that beginning first thing this morning, the executive members of the board have been meeting here to quite likely sort things out amongst themselves. So we're taking a look at hopefully having them have some consensus among themselves before they arrive at that 1 o'clock meeting, if in fact they will make it at exactly 1 o'clock. I also did want to give an update, Anne, with regards to the issues going on at the legislature. Now, there is a very small chance that an emergency meeting would be called today. We are understanding that there are logistical problems with the MPPs being out of town, and a lot of work happening behind the scenes to try to get the MPPs back into the legislature. We understand working hard to try to convene for a meeting at 1:30 tomorrow afternoon. That is 1:30 on Sunday at the legislature. Where do things stand right now? Well, we do know that the Liberals have this back-to-work legislation pretty well drafted up. We have already heard from John Tory that his party does already support the back-to-work legislation at this point, and we are waiting to hear if the NDP will support the back-to-work legislation. They have not yet seen the document. They are waiting to read it before they decide whether or not they're going to back it. So, best case scenario is that all parties are on board, they all support it, and the best case scenario is that they could legislate workers back to work in time for Monday. The worst case scenario is that the NDP does not support the legislation. There would then have to be some debate over it, and then to come to a resolution so that all parties are on board, and then it would be passed, which then could delay us very well, looking to Tuesday to legislate workers back to work. So we are taking a look at a few things. A lot, as you can imagine here, Anne, is really just happening on the fly because all of this was not, there was no foreshadowing of this kind of extreme measure by the TTC. And so a lot of people now on all levels of government scrambling, trying to figure out a solution. So the best case scenario, all parties on board at the legislature, it passes tomorrow, and then we can legislate the workers back. Worst case scenario, we're still looking at about Tuesday with possibly getting the TTC back up and running.
Any chance, Melissa, that if they do sit across from the bargaining table this afternoon, the two sides, that they might be able to at least craft some sort of solution to this prior to the legislature being reconvened tomorrow?
I think that's the hope on both sides, Anne, but we know very well, having covered this for as long as we have, there are a lot of signs out here that we can try to read to try to gauge the atmosphere up there. And when it seems like there is so much fragmentation happening within the union, it's hard to imagine that they could sort that out and then come to the table for another round of negotiations and bargaining with the commission. There are two major hurdles here that we have to get over. So while the best case scenario is that the union can get together and have a united front when they reconvene with the not only the provincial mediator but with the commission once again, Chief General Manager Gary Webster. You know, the best case scenario is that they can join hands and go in there as united front, and that they can make their demands very, very clear. The next hurdle is, will the commission be able to acquiesce? Will they be able to come to an agreement if in fact the union comes with very clear demands? So two major hurdles, Anne.
Yes.
And behind the scenes in all of this now, the legislature scrambling to see what they can do with their back-to-work legislation if in fact they can get that in place before the Monday rush.
And you have to wonder how the union workers are going to feel about being legislated back to work. Bob Kinnear putting them in a position last night where a strike was called for midnight, and there always had been talk that that there would be the request for the province to legislate them back to work. So it's really becoming very complicated. And Adam Giambrone confirmed with us this morning by phone that there's a lot more to this than just some problems with the contract, that there seems to be some division within the union and some troubles brewing. And as we've said, it's how do you negotiate in a united way if you're standing in a state of fractious situation where no one seems to be standing united, at least as far as what we hear within the union.
And this is certainly unprecedented. We have, in recent history, not ever had something that has really fallen away and really unraveled to such a dramatic degree. We really fully expected that the union would in fact get that 50+1 vote to pass the tentative deal. And in fact, what we got was not only the opposite, which was 65% turning it down, what we also have is a further unraveling within the union itself. And so it's really taken us back many, many, many steps, which we thought we had gained ground on with the tentative agreement being decided upon here last Sunday. And really, we are taking many, many steps backwards. It's going to take a while, and I think, before we can get this ball moving in the right direction again. And really, that is up to the executive board first and foremost, and then up to hopefully the provincial mediators to step in as well. So it's going to be, again, a roller coaster ride for not only us and everybody covering this, but for the transit-taking population. Unfortunately, no clear answer as to when they are going to have the TTC back up and running.
You know, you've been looking for signs and clues. You did that last weekend. You're doing it again for us now. You saw Gary Webster. What was his mood, if you will? And also, do you find it surprising that we really haven't heard anything from Bob Kinnear compared to how we heard from him so frequently and so openly prior to that sort of 11th hour on Sunday?
Yeah, very, very interesting. If you just take a look at that alone, and because we know that he has been very forthcoming with the media, very open with the state of negotiations and keeping us abreast of all of the issues that they were confronting. And now we are hearing nothing, literally nothing official. We know that he had released a statement when there was initial rumblings that there was some issues going on with the executive board, and he's calling it an internal process, and that he was not welcoming any interference by the outside public, including the media, and he would comment when there was something to comment about. And again, we were hearing that very likely there was going to be a press conference here. That now up in the air because I think until the executive board can have one voice, he will not be the voice to speak on that, at least not yet. So we're awaiting whatever happens to be being discussed upstairs right now, anxiously awaiting. It would be, I think, in my opinion, Anne, a good sign if Bob Kinnear were able to come down anytime soon, hopefully before that 1 o'clock deadline, to talk to the media. That would at least prove at the very minimum that some progress has been made between his executive board. If that doesn't happen, Anne, I think you leave it up to interpretation, and we would decipher that that would not be a good sign.
And yet the provincial government seems poised to at least open up the idea of back-to-work legislation as early as 1:30 tomorrow, meaning that's when they will convene in the legislature, and then we will watch as those events unfold. And most people hoping that if it does come to that, transit users hoping that something will put the TTC back on track by Monday morning.
We're hoping that's the best case scenario, but fingers crossed. We hope everybody, if any of them are watching, take a big deep breath, but there is a lot on the line here and a lot to work out over the next 2 days.
We asked Mayor David Miller to join us, and I understand he will be dropping by CP24 in the next hour. So, of course, we'll speak with him. He was he appeared to be angry last night when he presented himself to the press and his thoughts about what had happened. We'll get his view today, what he knows about the contract, what he thinks will be the next steps, his communication with the Premier, and what he has to say to the City of Toronto and its citizens.
We'll look forward to hearing that.
All right. Thanks, Melissa. You're
Okay.
watching CP24. You're watching CP24. Coming up in 1 minute, we'll take a look at pretty busy traffic because of the TTC strike in Toronto and the weekend weather forecast. Good afternoon. You're watching CP24. The TTC is on strike. Lots of commuters were simply stranded when the TTC moved to strike at midnight. Many were stuck, wondering how they would make their way home.
I came from McCowan and Finch. I just got the 129. I came here, and the bus driver was like, "Oh, there's a walk-off. There's no TTC service." So that's it. No way to go home.
I got to St. Andrew, and I was told that the TTC would be on strike at 12 o'clock. So I was hoping when I get to Scarborough Town, my bus would be here and I would be lucky, but here I am.
I don't really know what's going to happen. Like, it was unexpected. I was just hoping to get home.
Some folks who live in Scarborough managed to make their way there only to discover the RT was shutting down, leaving them only partway home. A lot of commuters with lots of trouble overnight, and of course that will continue until the strike ends. Let's go live to CP24's Karen Lieberman on Queen Street, where it's kind of different activity right now. Hi, Karen.
Hi, Anne. You're absolutely right. Lots more activity than there was the last time we spoke. It's just getting really, really busy. Lots of hustle and bustle at this time. Obviously because of the strike, partly as well because it's a Saturday afternoon, and lots of people are out on Queen Street because it's the place to be in Toronto. Lots of cars. I'm going to describe for you what I'm seeing at this point. Lots of cars. Obviously, one thing that's missing at this point is the streetcars, which is still really unusual, even though I've been, watching all day long and not seeing them. It's still sort of a weird thing not to see when you're so used to Toronto, because Toronto identifies itself as, with the TTC and the streetcars. And, I love that when I first moved to the city. Lots of people getting around on foot today, trying to get to where they need to be by foot or, of course, by cab. tons of cabs on Queen Street today, I can tell you that much. And, you know, just people taking it easy. And I think at this point, the shock factor that we've been talking about earlier, people shocked by the TTC strike, especially that was more around midnight and then even into the early morning when people were starting to wake up and turn on CP24 and see TTC on strike. That shock factor, I think, is sort of subsiding a little bit. People starting to realize that, you know, it's time to start making arrangements. It's time to start finding alternate means of getting to where you need to go and maybe even planning ahead for Monday, because of course we're not exactly sure what's happening quite yet. So need to look ahead and plan for that as well. And I mean, it is Toronto and some people work on weekends. We do, of course. Here we are working. So tomorrow morning, if nothing is in order by then you'll need to figure out how you're going to get to where you need to go. So carpool, drive if you have to. Be aware that the traffic is getting heavy. That's what we're hearing on a lot of the highways and even streets like here on Queen Street. Lots of activity at this point for sure. And
I think people not wanting to face the reality that there may still be a strike for Monday morning, but we are hearing that the provincial government is poised to convene tomorrow and bring in all of the MPPs that are available to come in. They sit, they look at this back to work legislation. We have heard that John Tory and the Conservatives are willing to back this legislation. We haven't heard yet from NDP leader Howard Hampton, but if that is the case, then there could be, and there is the hope that this legislation will pass and that might put the TTC back on track for the Monday morning rush in.
I think that's definitely the hope right now, especially from the people that I've been talking to. Their biggest concern really is Monday morning, and I think we're all bracing for the worst because traffic is just going to be a mess in this city, and of course lots more cars. And as we know, Toronto already has such, you know, high volume of traffic, high volume of cars on the highways and the main arteries. So yeah, let's hope for the best. Let's be optimistic at this point, because really we have nothing to lose. We're already in a strike scenario, and that really was the worst case scenario when we were looking at the situation last week.
It's interesting too, the TTC, depending on what day it is, they lose a lot of money each day that they're not working, and the workers don't get money as well, and a lot of businesses are affected by a lack of transit running, and for people just trying to get around, it makes it very, very difficult. Karen, we have a couple of big events coming up in downtown Toronto. One is Raptors game this afternoon, and ongoing is the Green Living show at Exhibition Place, and there are just events here and there in a very thriving city like Toronto. It's got a lot of people scratching their head as to whether they'll go, how they get there, and how they get out of the situation as well.
Absolutely, really, really good point. That's true, and it is the weekend, so already lots of people milling around, doing whatever they have to do, and getting to places like you said, the Green Living show and the Raptors game, which will probably be a lot of people on the streets at that point trying to get to that, and just Saturday night. I mean, it's just regular Saturday night stuff. The entertainment district is always packed, so it's going to be unusually busy, I'm sure, for people to get anywhere at this point. So you just have to be patient, really.
Absolutely, Karen. Thank you so much. Good to see you.
You too.
All right. You're watching CP24. Straight ahead, the latest from the streets of Toronto.
Rangers at the Pens last night. It's the sibling rivalry series. Jordan Stahl taking on younger brother Mark Stahl. Second period, Mark Stahl sets up one. Sean Avery wires it past Fleury. Rangers with a 3-0 lead. Now the Pens scored two quick ones in the second, then they tied it in the third. Hossa from a weird angle, 3-all. 20 seconds after that one, Malkin to Sikora. Just like that, the Pens were in front 4-3. Halfway through the third, Rangers pull even. Yager throws it out to Gomez. We're tied at 4s. But the game winner with under 2 minutes left in the game, Crosby's shot goes off Malkin and in. Pens rally to take game 1 5-4. Game 2 goes Sunday. Jays got Scott Rowland back last night in Kansas City. Rowland way funnier than Troy Gloss was. Gloss always looked like he wanted to punch you in the tooth. A.J. Burnett, the starter for Toronto. Buck, with a run-scoring double in the fifth, gets Casey on the board. Seventh inning, Jays tie it. Lyle Overbay with his first home run since August of last year. That's a dry spell. It's 1-all. Still the seventh, Royals regain the lead. David DeJesus rips one right up the middle, just missed Burnett. Buck comes home. It's 2-1 Bad People. 8th inning, Scott Rowland to the rescue, tied at 2s. He drops one into center. Rios and Stairs score. Jays are in front now, 4-2, and AJ Burnett is overjoyed. Bottom of 8, KC comes back. Eckstein drops the ball. His second error of the game, but he's so adorable, we have to forgive him. It's 4-all. Still Downs on the mound, still the 8th. DeJesus with a chopper, 2 more runs for KC. Jays totally blow it. KC scores 6 in the 8th, 8-4, the final. Catherine Humphreys, CP24.
We have the latest from the streets of Toronto. One man is under arrest. Another is being sought after a police pursuit of a stolen car ended in a crash on the 401. At least 2 police cruisers were damaged as the stolen car was pinned up against a fence in the eastbound Collectors. Police say the chase began after a security guard called to report 2 men trying to steal a car on Ashwarren Road, off Keele, north of Shepherd. One man ran off when police arrived, but the other sped off. The wanted car apparently shot off the ramp as the driver tried to get onto the 401. Police say there was a struggle at the scene and 6 officers suffered minor injuries. A 43-year-old man is under arrest on a string of charges. A political superstar got the celebrity treatment in Toronto. Bill Clinton drew large crowds yesterday at Exhibition Place. The former president's motorcade rolled onto the CNE grounds where hundreds of people were waiting for a glimpse of Clinton. He had speaking engagements yesterday at the Economic Club of Toronto and the 2nd annual Green Living Show.
We're camped out, just dying to see Mr. Clinton, President Clinton. We're really excited about that. Yeah, because he's done so much for the world and so much for the environment, and he's pretty special.
Well, I just think he's a great speaker, and I've never seen him in person, and would love to hear what he has to say about the environment. We've heard Al Gore, we haven't heard him.
I bought the tickets for my daughter for her birthday. I did. It was her one of her dreams to come and see him speak. Yeah, and I gave her 2 tickets and said, you can take whoever you like, and she took me.
Clinton charges hundreds of thousands of dollars for a speech and makes millions every year from his public appearances. It's 12:27 on CP24. Our live extensive coverage of the TTC strike continues. We're going to bring you the very latest on the strike as it becomes available. Mayor David Miller will be joining us in just a few minutes. The TTC is on strike. Welcome back to CP24. There's word that Premier Dalton McGuinty is recalling the legislature for tomorrow to deal with the sudden TTC strike. The Premier has said he will move as quickly as possible to end the strike with back-to-work legislation after a request for that from Mayor David Miller. If the legislation is passed in time, buses, streetcars, and subways could be rolling again as early as Monday. And the buses stopped rolling at midnight along with streetcars and subway trains. Members of the Amalgamated Transit Union rejected the tentative deal by a vote of 65%, stranding thousands of riders who didn't expect the sudden walkout. A mediator is calling on both sides to return to the bargaining table this afternoon. We spoke by phone earlier with TTC Chair Adam Gimbroni, who suggests there may be more to this dispute than just the contract.
A lot of this was, I suspect, not as much about specific issues in the contract, but about other things that were happening at the TTC. We will take a look at these things and do our best. But I don't think the only issue here is money. I think there are other issues at stake. We will do our best to work with the Ministry of Labour and to reach a negotiated settlement.
Would it be fair to say, Adam, that you suspect that this is really just the union's members saying we don't want Bob Kinnear as our head any longer?
Look, I don't know enough, Anne, about what is going on in the ATU 113. That's something that you probably have to talk to some union members about. They'd have a better sense. We've been focused on, of course, getting the system shut down over the last 12 hours, making sure there was an orderly shutdown, and that happened. Torontonians and TTC riders, while incredibly frustrated, no doubt, responded very well. And we had very few incidents of any problems, and almost all of the buses and streetcars came into the garage with no problems.
Union boss Bob Kinnear issued this statement last night. In his own words, Bob says, "We have assessed the situation and decided that we will not expose our members to the dangers of assaults from angry and irrational members of the public." He continues, "The reports from our members of increases in threats and abuse from passengers last weekend after we gave our original 48 hours notice left us no choice but to withdraw our services immediately. We have a legal responsibility to protect the safety of our members, and so does the TTC. Again, 65% of unionized TTC workers that voted said no to the tentative deal reached last Sunday. The Amalgamated Transit Union Local 113 executive did recommend its members accept the 3-year deal, which included an annual 3% wage hike. However, about 2/3 of workers that voted rejected it. We spoke to one union shop steward just moments after bus service stopped at midnight.
I apologize for the inconvenience. However, we have a democratic society, and as a result of that, they've spoken, and so we have to heed what they requested.
Can you talk a little bit about what wasn't right with the offer and why it was rejected?
I can't tell you that.
Well, what are you guys saying? They weren't happy with the any kind of job security issues. I know contracting out was an issue with the maintenance guys. Sort of what was the turning point on the vote?
The turning point, that's a good question. I would imagine from hearing what's been going on that there are certain people that are not happy with the contract, and as a result of that, they express their views.
You're watching CP24. Straight ahead, a live interview with Mayor David Miller. Stay with us. Well, that was a shot of the Sheraton Parkway where the TTC union executive has been meeting, and there is some hope or assumption that the two sides will be facing one another once again at the bargaining table as early as 1 o'clock this afternoon. Right now, we're joined live by Toronto Mayor David Miller. Thank you for being here. I appreciate this. Your response when you first heard that the TTC had gone on strike?
Well, I was extremely frustrated that the agreement, which was a fair agreement, 3, and 3, some benefit improvements, private industrial settlements have been about 2.9, public 3.1, right in the middle, perfectly fair. I was very frustrated that wasn't adopted after the union leadership recommended it to their members. But to go on strike on virtually no notice after promising 48 hours notice was unacceptable. I think it's irresponsible. It's not fair to Torontonians. And it makes it virtually impossible to try to resolve this directly with the union.
Mayor Miller, are we looking at a contract dispute, or are we looking at a fractious situation within the union Local 113?
Well, there's lots of rumors about splits in the union, and I can't really comment on that. It just wouldn't be appropriate. But what I can say is the TTC management, our professional negotiators, bargained fairly. They upheld the public interest. They reached a fair settlement. The union said it was a fair settlement. They recommended it to their members. They've got a duty to make sure that they deliver. And it puts everybody in an impossible situation, these circumstances. We've got to now make sure that the city's running properly, and that's why I called Premier McGuinty immediately and said, Premier, we need back to work legislation. This is impossible.
Tell me about that conversation and what was his response to you over the phone?
Well, the Premier is terrific. I explained the circumstances. I indicated the union had broken its agreement about the 48 hours notice. And the reason you have that 48 hours is you might be able to bargain away any problems. It also allows Torontonians to plan. People last night were stranded, and that is absolutely unacceptable. And I also said to him that because the union executive couldn't deliver its members, it makes it virtually impossible, although the TTC will be back at the bargaining table today. The Ministry of Labour has requested, but it makes it virtually impossible to solve the problem through bargaining. We already reached an agreement. It couldn't be sold. And I said, in those circumstances, I'd ask you to act as quickly as possible. The Premier agreed, and he is acting as quickly as possible to bring in appropriate legislation.
And what happens if this legislation is passed? What happens to the deal that was put together and was agreed upon, in theory, a tentative agreement? What happens to that agreement?
Well, I haven't seen the draft legislation. It wouldn't be appropriate for me to see it until it's public. But what has happened in the past is that the province recommends the appointment of an arbitrator, and they put in place certain rules, and then you fight in front of the arbitrator. The TTC gave in some areas on this agreement, and in front of the arbitrator, it'll be in a position where everything is on the table again.
Does it mean, in essence, that some of the things that the union fought for and agreed to in the tentative agreement might be gone?
That's certainly possible.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about the need for the TTC to become an essential service, which in essence, to many people, what stands out in that is that they don't have the right to strike. How do you feel about that, given what has happened in the past 12 to 15 hours?
There's a motion before council on Tuesday, and my emotional reaction last night, I was extremely frustrated. Of course, you want to say eliminate the right to strike. It's not as clear-cut as that, though, and I think we have to be careful. What would be good about it is that the TTC is the lifeblood of Toronto, and Torontonians wouldn't be put at risk. What's bad about it is that all of the essential service contracts get arbitrated, and historically, they cost much more. The arbitrators tend to be more generous than parties freely bargaining, and they also impose the language. And when the parties freely bargain, your language is usually more workable and more realistic. So it's not quite as clear-cut as that. So we'll see on Tuesday. I want to wait until we've solved the problem before making my own mind up. And as I told you off air, Anne, my uncle was in a union in England. He was a meter reader for the electric company. My mum was a teacher at the time. Their union really made big gains, the Federation of Women's Teachers Associations. And my other uncle, when he left the Navy, became a labor arbitrator. So I have seen this in my own life about how it's supposed to work, and it's not supposed to work like this. When the union executive reach an agreement that's fair, they've got an obligation as well. I'm just glad that the Premier is acting as quickly as possible, because it's my duty now to get Torontonians to work safely next week, and the Premier is going to help.
Where does this put union head Bob Kinnear?
Well, I think he's in a difficult position, but that's between him and his executive and his union members. Our negotiators sat down in goodwill, gave in some areas, worked out a very fair agreement, and he's representing his members. And you assume when he and his executive sign it, that they're representing the will of their members. And if they're not, it puts the TTC in an impossible position. Who are we going to negotiate with if we can't negotiate with the executive? What
will the negotiating be like if indeed they do sit across from the table once again as early as 20 minutes from now? There's been a lot of water under the bridge throughout this whole process, and it really came to a head last night with this snap strike that took Toronto by surprise.
And broke the word of the union.
Now, was that a legal document that said we will give you 48 hours notice?
No, if it was a legal document, of course, we would have had legal remedies. It wasn't, but it was the word. And in these negotiations, you have to trust people's word when they give it. The mediator appointed by the province was actually involved, I believe, in the last TTC settlement. He's certainly one of the best labor mediators. He's terrific. He was helpful this time in bringing the parties to an agreement. But I don't know where they can go. The TTC will be there in goodwill, but they've already offered a fair agreement that the union says was fair. So we're not going to negotiate against ourselves. So I I mean, I think most people can guess what it'll be like at the table. It's going to be pretty tense.
TTC Chair Adam Giambroni said to me live this morning on CP24, we don't have any more money to bring to this. And he said, I am not optimistic that anything can come from this bargaining.
Well, it's hard to imagine where people will go, but the TTC management will be there in good faith. That's their duty. We only can assume the union will be there in good faith, but they haven't delivered.
What do you say to the people of Toronto, and they're all watching right now? What do you say?
The first thing I say is thank you. People were amazing last night. They were given no notice about this strike, and people obviously upset and frustrated, as I was, but they got home safely. There were no incidents. It speaks to Torontonians again and again and again. We've got great people in this city. Second thing I say is we're doing everything we can to solve this problem. The Premier has agreed to our request for back-to-work legislation. It's a serious thing to do, but in the circumstances, there's no choice. And we're going to get the TTC running as quickly as humanly possible, but we need your help. We need people to help out, carpool. If you can bike, walk. And on Monday, if it's still on strike, certain roads will be no stopping, and we will need people to work flex hours, to come in late or early, to work from home. There'll be a bike lane on Bay Street, for example. There'll be a bikeway across the city. Use all the alternatives, and please help out your neighbors. People were great last night. If they keep up with that spirit, we'll get through this.
Are you shocked at this turn of events, Mayor Miller?
Extremely disappointed. The conduct of the Amalgamated Transit Union Local 113 is not acceptable. I don't believe it's responsible, and I know Torontonians share my view.
Are you optimistic that back-to-work legislation will be passed and will be implemented so that we might see the TTC back on track by Monday morning?
I'm optimistic the back-to-work legislation will be passed quickly. As to the exact timing, that's in the legislature's hands, and it requires, as I understand, all-party agreement. So we'll have to see what the Premier announces and when he announces it.
What do you say to Bob Kinnear right now?
Well, I'm not going to speak to Bob over TV. I spoke to him directly last night, and I expressed my views, and I view this very seriously. We take people at their word. There was a commitment about 48 hours notice to close the TTC down in an hour is just unacceptable. I don't believe that's responsible. We expect better.
Mayor Miller, thank you very much. I know you have a busy schedule. It was to be your family day today. I thank you very much for talking to all of us and everyone watching CP24. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Sam. Thank you.
And you're watching CP24. Coming up, our live extensive coverage of the TTC strike continues. Our TTC strike coverage continues. Welcome back. Many commuters say that they were simply shocked by the news of a strike at midnight. They expected some sort of notice, which of course never came.
I'm going home after finishing my job, and they went on strike without giving any notice, so it's no good. It's no good for public.
I don't know what's going on. I just found out while I was on the subway. They had an announcement that wasn't very clear. I'm just confused, that's all.
We didn't hear it in the press at all, so it's kind of a shock. Because I thought it was going to happen Monday.
I know, it totally caught everyone off guard. We just got out of the movies. We bust downtown, so now we're trapped here.
This is ridiculous, and people are stranded in the middle of the night. And if you were out, you wouldn't have known what's going on. It's totally ridiculous. I live all the way in Richmond Hill, and it's absolutely ludicrous. And I'm stranded on Yonge Street at Queen. And people who live in the area, this is a shock. And now it's sunk in because there's no streetcars anywhere. It's craziness.
Oh, yeah. So I don't know. I'm not sure.
So as you just heard, a whole lot of commuters totally shocked about the news, many feeling stranded. And Queen Street was a busier place than usual, with many commuters either hailing cabs or taking that long walk home. With no buses, streetcars, subways running, cab companies are expecting to do a booming business. It was a scramble last night to hail a taxi. The wait for cabs is getting longer as the day goes on, and just getting through on the phones takes some patience. Some drivers, though, are happy for the business.
Well, means a lot of money for us, eh? Well, they've been saying they'll go on strike, but all of a sudden they went. It's a surprise. Well, but they should have told the community they were going to go on strike. People could arrange something else, you know?
Cab companies say on a regular day they do about 20,000 trips. So if the TTC is not running on Monday, they say pre-booking now is not an option because demand will be just too high. With the very latest on what's going on as far as talks are concerned with this TTC strike, we go live to the Sheraton Parkway in Richmond Hill. CP24's Melissa Grello is standing by. Melissa, so much information has come forward today. Let's review what we know so far. The legislature may convene tomorrow in a special session. It seems that the Premier has responded to Mayor David Miller's request for back-to-work legislation. We'll see where it goes from there. What do you know about the possibility of talks resuming at the Sheraton Parkway?
Well, the good news, Anne, is we did get a call from the union spokesperson telling us that at the request of the Ministry of Labor, the union is returning to the bargaining table. So they had initially a tentative plan to have a press conference for the media here at the Sheraton. That has been postponed indefinitely since they have now returned to the bargaining table, and we believe that that is happening now as we speak with the provincial negotiators on site. And so we believe that right now, Anne, all parties are in fact back at the negotiating table. And again, the union telling us that they have returned to negotiations at the request of the Ministry of Labor. So that is some good news there. On the front of the back to work legislation, and we do understand that all parties do need to sign off on back to work legislation. We have already heard that John Tory has said that he and his party will back the back to work legislation. Liberals, of course, enacting all of this. And then the final is the NDP. Now, Howard Hampton is scheduled now to speak in front of Queen's Park on the lawn at 1:30 this afternoon to discuss all of this and perhaps let us in on where he stands on the back to work legislation. At this point, it looks like he is the only holdout. If, in fact, he does support the back-to-work legislation, that would be some good news, because what could possibly delay it going through in the legislature is debate. So we are right now anticipating that he will say that the NDP will support the back-to-work legislation, that there will be no debate required, and that it can pass through as quickly as possible.
All right.
So we are awaiting word from Howard Hampton at 1:30, Ann.
And what I find interesting is that often unions support, in some cases, the NDP, which means in turn they're open to looking at unions. So it'll be very interesting to see whether Howard Hampton, how he weighs and balances this. And of course, again, as you mentioned, 1:30 on the lawn of Queen's Park. Melissa, the mayor just joined us, and he, when asked, said very clearly that if back-to-work legislation is enacted, that pretty much the deal that was hammered out, you know, they kind of are starting at square one. So, you know, you have to wonder how the workers are going to feel about this.
This is going to be a very difficult situation if it's not already, let's be honest, and with the way things are right now. And if, in fact, the back-to-work legislation gets passed through legislature very quickly and the workers are mandated to be back on the job, the public is hoping for Monday, no doubt. What happens next is going to then take some time, and it's going to be some very careful dancing on both the commission side and the union side, because there are some very sensitive issues here that look like they're not simple and therefore could not necessarily be hammered out easily and quickly. So it is going to be a very interesting time between today and tomorrow. We will continue to stake things out here. It is closed door meetings initially, or last week we had been up and down on the 10th floor here at the Sheraton. This week, not so lucky. They are really hammering down on keeping this a closed door meeting. And again, at the request of the Ministry of Labor, the union is back at negotiations. All sides are talking as we speak.
I find it interesting that last weekend there was pressure put on the city and the commission by Bob Kinnear, who created a deadline of 4 p.m. if there wasn't a deal, which meant a strike at 4 a.m. the next morning. It's almost the other way around now. It seems that the city, by calling in the province to step in with possible back-to-work legislation, that indeed they have created almost a bit of a deadline against the union.
You know, Anne, there's got to be that pressure now because, of course, they did not anticipate this. And the fact that there was no warning to the public, they understandably, and all of us can understand that this is a very, very delicate situation, but one that needs to be nipped in the bud quickly. And therefore, having the mediators come in and asking the union to come to the table, they understand time is of the essence here. And there isn't a lot of wiggle room in terms of timing as far as their end of the the bargain goes. Of course, the back-to-work legislation, that is happening on a whole different front with a lot of work happening behind the scenes. But when we take a look at exactly what's happening right here, right now at the Sheraton, very delicate and very complicated issues, it seems. And so, definitely time is of the essence, and that pressure is absolutely on for everybody involved.
And here's what I see. They're still working on that same contract if they are working today and bargaining and negotiating. Once it is back-to-work legislation, as I mentioned, then, it's no holds barred. It's pretty much wiping the slate clean and they start all over again. And some may say that the union might not be able to get what it had in place in this contract that was just that was voted against by 65% of the union members yesterday.
Andrew, we've been covering this for a solid month and a half now. And if, in fact, we go back to that, if we have a clean slate at the bargaining table, presumably we've got a lot of time ahead of us, unfortunately, if weeks is the issue here. So I think, and it is unprecedented, I think is the only word. Shocking, unprecedented, and there's nothing else for us to really base this on moving forward.
And the other layer that we need to add, the conversation with Adam Gimbroni this morning, he intimated, he suggested, and he pretty much confirmed that there seemed to be more at stake than just the contract. It seemed to be some perhaps infighting, some problems within the union that were rearing their ugly head, and that it wasn't just an issue with the contract. That really muddies the water.
And it'll be interesting to see how the mediator and with the commission at the table deal with that, if in fact they're dealing with that issue as well. Will that stay with the union between themselves, or is now, because they are back at the bargaining table, is that an issue that's going to be worked out with all of the parties involved? That's the big question, Ann.
We talked about a win-win-win situation last Sunday. It seemed that the union was happy, the city, the commission happy, transit takers were happy. Today, the workers are not earning a living today. The city of Toronto doesn't have transit, and people are back at the bargaining table, one only hopes, with the threat of back-to-work legislation. So it's not the same situation that we saw last Sunday. And I don't want to say lose, lose, lose situation, but it is not a great day in the history of the city of Toronto.
Absolutely not, Ann, and it's going to be a crucial what gets worked out here between today and very late on Sunday, leading up to Monday, which sort of the unofficial deadline of the Monday rush back to work. So a lot of things definitely we're expecting to transpire between now and certainly Sunday.
You have to wonder if they check their emotions at the door. These are human beings, and Bob Kinnear has made his move by calling the strike midnight last night. He's been very clear about how he feels about Gary Webster, the TTC Chief General Manager. The city, Mayor David Miller just said that this was irresponsible. So there seems to be some really heated emotions. You have to wonder if they bring that to the table this afternoon.
And they're going to have to try very hard to keep that at the door. But, I think considering how unprecedented this is, it's going to be very, very trying for all of the parties involved, for sure.
All right, Melissa, thank you very much.
Okay, Ann.
You're watching CP24. Our live extensive coverage of the TTC strike continues. We're going to bring you the very latest on this strike as it becomes available. Stay with us as we keep you up to date all day on this breaking news, the strike that has stunned our city. It's 1 o'clock. You're watching CP24. There's word that Premier Dalton McGuinty is recalling the legislature for tomorrow to deal with the sudden TTC strike. The Premier has said he will move as quickly as possible to end the strike with back-to-work legislation after a request for that from Mayor David Miller. Now, if the legislation is passed in time, buses, streetcars, and subways could be rolling again as early as Monday morning. And they all stopped rolling at midnight. Members of the Amalgamated Transit Union rejected the tentative deal by a vote of 65%, stranding thousands of riders who didn't expect the sudden walkout. A mediator is calling on both sides to return to the bargaining table this afternoon. We spoke by phone earlier with TTC Chair Adam Gimbroni, who suggests there may be more to the dispute than just the contract.
A lot of this was, I suspect, not as much about specific issues in the contract, but about other things that were happening at the TTC. We will take a look at these things and do our best. But I don't think the only issue here is money. I think there are other issues at stake. We will do our best to work with the Ministry of Labour and to reach a negotiated settlement.
Would it be fair to say, Adam, that you suspect that this is really just the union's members saying we don't want Bob Kinnear as our head any longer?
Look, I don't know enough, Anne, about what is going on in the ATU 113. That's something that you probably have to talk to some union members about. They'd have a better sense. We've been focused on, of course, getting the system shut down over the last 12 hours, making sure there was an orderly shutdown, and that happened. Torontonians and TTC riders, while incredibly frustrated, no doubt, responded very well. And we had very few incidents of any problems, and almost all of the buses and streetcars came into the garage with no problems.
Union boss Bob Kinnear issued this statement last night. In his words, Bob says, quote, "We have assessed the situation and decided that we will not expose our members to the dangers of assaults from angry and irrational members of the public. The reports from our members of increases in threats and abuse from passengers last weekend after we gave our original 48 hours notice has left us no choice but to withdraw our services immediately. We have a legal responsibility to protect the safety of our members, and so does the TTC." Again, 65% of unionized TTC workers that voted said no to the tentative deal reached last Sunday. The Amalgamated Transit Union Local 113 executive did recommend its members accept the 3-year deal, which included an annual 3% wage hike. However, about 2/3 of workers that voted rejected it. We spoke to one union shop steward just moments after bus service stopped at midnight.
I apologize for the inconvenience. However, we have a democratic society, and as a result of that, they've spoken, and so we have to heed what they requested.
Can you talk a little bit about what wasn't right with the offer and why it was rejected?
I can't tell you that.
Well, what are you guys saying? They weren't happy with the any kind of job security issues. I know contracting out was an issue with the maintenance guys. Sort of what was the turning point on the vote?
The turning point. That's a good question. I would imagine from hearing what's been going on that there are certain people that are not happy with the contract, and as a result of that, they expressed their views.
Stunned riders were turned away when the walkout began, leaving them scrambling for another way of getting around. Many opted to hail cabs. Others could be seen using their cell phones to call family and friends for help. Some simply decided to walk. We had our cameras out all night, finding out how you managed to get home and how you plan on making your way through the city.
This is how I'm getting home. 2 feet, a heartbeat, and stiletto heels.
It's too bad. Like, I wish the TTC could get it together, because people need to get home at night, you know?
Obviously, they have their rights, but they should give us warning at least 2 hours in advance instead of going on strike at 11:55 and then people stranded. They come like 2 hours to work. Now they're stranded, right?
I'm stuck in Little Italy. I live in Scarborough. Am I going to walk?
It's totally essential service. I mean, late at night, you don't want to spend... I live in the East End. I don't want to spend a lot of money in a cab. So it's surprising because I thought they had it all worked out. Like, it's really kind of disappointing because it's something that we need for this city to thrive.
With buses, streetcars, and subways not running, cab companies are expected to do a booming business. It was a real scramble, though, last night to hail a cab. The wait for taxis is getting longer as the day goes on, and just getting through on the phone lines takes some patience. Some drivers, though, are happy for the business.
Well, means a lot of money for us, eh? Well, they have been saying they will go on strike, but all of a sudden they went. It's a surprise.
Well,
but they should have told the community they were going to go on strike. People could arrange something else,
Companies say on a regular day they do about 20,000 trips. So if the TTC is still not running on Monday, they say pre-booking now is not an option because demand will be just too high. And the city has a contingency plan in place to deal with the traffic chaos a transit strike will cause, but those plans don't take effect until Monday morning. Despite that fact, police are starting to crack down this weekend, and they're asking all motorists to be patient, please.
There's challenges getting around on a weekend with all the events that are beginning to occur with the better weather, the soccer games going on later today. looking forward to the week, we're going to have extra patience. There is a contingency plan. I've noticed on your website the roads that are going to be designated as emergency routes are listed there. The public need to be aware. There will be no parking in those areas. It'll be aggressively enforced. That's to allow people to get in and out of the city. Even handicapped stickers are not above parking in those areas for this emergency period. So we ask them to take special note. And again, we're going to encourage people to be patient, plan ahead, leave early, try to carpool. But patience is going to be the key as this moves forward.
For more on the contingency plans for the City of Toronto in light of the strike, go to cp24.com. By the way, if you're looking for another way to get around this weekend, don't depend on GO Transit for any additional service. GO Transit will be providing what they call regular service for customers, even with a higher volume of passengers. Riders can expect crowds and some delays at various stations. On its website, GO states that it is already stretched to capacity, so it will not be adding more trains or buses. People who plan on riding the system are being recommended to get to their station early to find parking, buy tickets. If possible, walk there, get a ride or carpool to the station. Also, good idea to buy tickets in advance to avoid long lineups before you ride. Back to Rabina. This time she's at Queen's Park, I believe, and we're expecting Howard Hampton to speak at 1:30 this afternoon to talk about whether he and his party support the back-to-work legislation. What do you know, Rabina?
All we know right now is that Howard Hampton is due to speak here at 1:30. No indication as to whether he's going to say he supports back-to-work legislation or not, but we do know he's coming out here to make some sort of statement when it comes to the TTC strike. And you know, there always has been that association between NDP and they've got the support of unions for the most part, or sometimes in general. It'll be very interesting to see what he has to say, and his support obviously is crucial in the passage of this document. Yeah, of course. I mean, he is the leader of the provincial NDP party, and his support would speak to the fact that if back-to-work legislation is necessary, if it's something that is necessary to get the city back up and running with public transit, him supporting it would be a big boost to that happening.
And it may not be black and white. It might be that that there would be debate, which would slow the process down. And I think what people are aiming for, transit riders who have expressed to us through this whole process that they want, it's like the two kids fighting in the sandbox, work it out amongst yourselves, just leave our transit alone. I think that's what people are hoping for, that however it comes about at this stage, that the buses, streetcars, and subways are up and running for the rush on Monday morning.
That's exactly right. I mean, Monday morning is when we're really going to feel this strike. If it continues for another 48 hours, when we're really going to feel how this city is going to be impacted by a transit strike. Right now, driving up here to Queen's Park, there's not many people downtown. I mean, people have just decided not to bother coming because it's just too hard, too much traffic, too much hassle. Spend time at home, maybe barbecue. It's good weather, hopefully for a little while longer. But I mean, Monday, people have no choice. They have to come into work. They have to be here on time. And not every employer is as sympathetic, perhaps, to people who are traveling far distances. Maybe they're just asking them, well, you've got to somehow get in.
It's ironic the Green Living Show is going on right now at Exhibition Place, and with an increase in cars on the road because of a TTC strike, well, there goes the possibility of poor air quality rising, those numbers.
I'm sure that all those people going to that show were planning on taking transit. Yes. Considering they're green conscious,
or pedal power, or booty power.
Exactly, but now they might have to have resorted to their vehicles to get down to that show. How ironic.
Absolutely. All right, so we're waiting for Howard Hampton to appear. Interesting that he chose the front lawn, I hear, the green lawn of Queen's Park to make his announcement, and I gather he's going to take questions from the press. I know you'll be there front and center for us, Rabina. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anne.
All right, we'll see you soon. By the way, this is what we know so far. There is word that Queen's Park is saying that Premier Dalton McGuinty will recall the legislature tomorrow to introduce back-to-work legislation. We're waiting to hear from Howard Hampton. We have heard from John Tory. He has expressed that he will support that legislation. We have yet to hear from the NDP. That should come at about 1:30. The union that represents 9,000 TTC operating and maintenance employees voted down the tentative settlement by 65%. Thus, the strike, which began at midnight last night. The Amalgamated Transit Union, Local 113, has not yet announced plans for its next steps. Labor ministry mediators have called on both sides to return to the negotiating table as quickly as possible sometime this afternoon. The TTC is saying that it will have limited service in place for people who have to attend medical appointments, things like chemotherapy and dialysis. You're watching CP24. The TTC is on strike. We will take a very close look at traffic now in and around the city as more people hit the road in their cars, and we'll peek at the weekend weather forecast. Traffic right now, still not too bad in this part of the world. It's the 401 looking west toward Kiel around Yorkdale. We had an earlier problem, but it's been cleared up. All lanes moving very well. We're going to move now a little bit east and a lot south, the Don Valley Parkway at Lawrence. Steady flow northbound and southbound. The Gardner Raptors game going on, and the Green Living Show at Exhibition Place. So you can expect perhaps the exit ramp at Spadina to be a little bit slow going, but the actual lanes eastbound and westbound on the Gardner are terrific. Never really saw the rain materialize, at least right here at Queen and John. Let's hope that it does stay away. There is, though, the chance of showers today. They could end by this afternoon. The risk of a thunderstorm, highs of 19. Clearing tonight, dropping to +4. Sunshine tomorrow, lovely high of 17. Cooler by the lake. Then the bottom falls out. We've got periods of rain on Monday, high of 13. Cloudy Tuesday, 40% chance of flurries or rain, and just 6. Same thing for Wednesday. The TTC is on strike. You're watching CP24. Coming up, our live extensive coverage of the strike continues. We'll find out how you, the commuters, will be getting around this weekend without public transit in the city. Here's another live look at Queen West and John, our home. A lot more traffic on the roads right now and no sign of a streetcar. TTC is on strike. We're hearing from John Tory, the Conservative Party leader here in Ontario, that he does support a back-to-work legislation. He's speaking live right now at Queen's Park. Let's go there.
Well, the level to the weekend was going along fine till about 12:30 last night, and it's been active since then.
Okay, so good to go?
All right, yeah.
So your plan is what now, Mr. Tory?
Well, let me just say this. I indicated in a statement that we issued last night that Mr. McGuinty should call the legislature back as quickly as possible, and he's done that. I understand the order has just been signed to have the legislature come back tomorrow. We will be assisting in any way that we can in the swift passage of the legislation that we will see later this afternoon, and so subject to a review of the legislation, we will support it and try to get it through, obviously, in time to have this come to an end as soon as possible. We went on to say, and we don't know yet whether Mr. McGuinty has considered the advice we had, that an ability to pay clause should be included in that legislation, simply because I don't think taxpayers and transit riders can go on endlessly paying increased wages, benefits, and other costs, and I think an arbitrator should be required to look at the question of ability to pay. But the bottom line is this. The way this was handled was outrageous. It put people's safety in jeopardy. It was insensitive and irresponsible. And now our job here is to make sure that the strike comes to an end as soon as possible.
John, can you explain that? Can you explain that ability to pay? Just a moment. Can you explain that ability to pay clause? What are you talking about?
when an arbitrator is sitting down to decide what should be awarded to the members of the transit union, we're simply saying the legislation should require that arbitrator take into account the ability of taxpayers and transit riders to finance whatever settlement he awards, and that there isn't a bottomless pit. People can't afford to pay any amount at all to travel on transit, and he should take that into account in his decision.
John, is that a deal breaker for the Conservatives? Because I understand the legislation as it's now crafted is clean, so-called clean legislation. There are no such clauses because they're worried that the NDP wouldn't be able to support that kind of a bill, and then this could drag on. So is that a deal breaker for you guys?
We urge the government to do it. We think it's the right thing to do because we think that transit riders and taxpayers can't keep paying endless increases of any magnitude to anybody, especially when times are tough. But we've just simply given them our advice that we think this would be the right thing to do.
But it's not a deal breaker then? You guys would still support the legislation if that clause is not in this back-to-work bill?
We will review the bill when we see it at 5:30 this afternoon, but our intention is to make sure this bill passes swiftly so the trains and buses can get running again as soon as possible.
So the ability to pay clause, should it be essential service?
On Sunday afternoon, will you agree to one-day passage in the legislature?
We're going to agree to put this through as quickly as possible, and that should mean, certainly in light of past precedent, that it could be passed tomorrow afternoon in a relatively short sitting of the legislature.
So does that mean then the ability to pay clause, do you still support the concept of essential service, making transit an essential service?
I have said consistently, I don't think we should be dealing with the question of essential service until we get the trains and buses running and get this over with, and I think the very raising of the matter wasn't helpful, and I just think we should put that to one side and deal with that after we get the trains and buses running and have people know they'll have transit not later than Monday morning, hopefully earlier.
John, what do you think about the union's actions?
Should there be consequences for the union leaders for staging this at 1 hour's notice?
I think the consequences they face are a dramatic loss of confidence and support from the public. I think what they did was completely outrageous and irresponsible. It put people's safety at risk, and there was no reason at all why they couldn't have given some notice and still withdrawn their services if that's what they chose to do without putting people at risk. I think it was outrageous.
Should litigation be considered? It's been done in the past.
I think that, we'll have to have a look. Let's get the trains and buses running first, but I think that this was a terrible, grave error in judgment they made to do this. It was not responsible, and it put the public safety at risk, which I think is a big mistake.
Is there an arrogance there within the union to think that they can do this to people? So many people were stranded downtown last night at midnight, going to bars, going to clubs, having dinner with friends.
It's a legal strike, but I just think what it was a monumental error in judgment in the sense that they put people's safety at risk. They took people who might otherwise have supported some of their grievances or claims and made them angry because they were treated like they didn't matter. And I think the public do matter, their safety matters, and this was just irresponsible.
Why not push to recall the legislature today?
The rules require 24 hours notice, and so I do think Mr. McGuinty and the government moved as quickly as they could. They signed the order, I think, within the last few minutes, and the legislature then can be called back tomorrow about this time. And so I think they moved as quickly as the rules permit, and we were prepared to show up at any time to pass this, but the rules require tomorrow.
Let's look to the future.
Is there a leadership vacuum on the Premier's part?
I think they moved to call the legislature back quickly. We moved immediately to say we would support this bill getting through as quickly as possible, subject to reading it. And I think everybody's doing everything they can to get the trains and buses running, and that's what people count on.
John, I hear that they didn't actually have back-to-work legislation ready to go until Miller phoned McGuinty last night around dinner time, and then they started the wheels running. Shouldn't they have this kind of stuff like on file, ready to go in a moment's notice? I mean, I don't know if it would have changed the timetable any, but certainly it seemed to me like it's a bit of an ad hoc kind of scramble on their part, isn't it?
Anybody who was on top of this and competently planning for any eventuality would have had legislation ready. In fact, we had legislation drafted so that in the event they'd said they wouldn't move, that we had a piece we could say we will introduce through a private member's bill. If we can do it, then they could have done it, and I just think it's another example of bad planning. But in the end, we're going to meet tomorrow and get this passed and hopefully have the trains running as soon as possible.
Is there a serious
switch? Something sleep at the switch. How could this just happen out of the blue and people get stranded?
Well, I mean, somebody was asleep at the switch and some other people made bad errors in judgment that were grossly insensitive. And I think the net result here was to inconvenience the public, especially on Friday night. But look, if we can get the trains running and the buses running, certainly not later than Monday morning and hopefully earlier. And look, they're negotiating too. Maybe something will come of that. But the bottom line is people will know they have transit service to go back to work on Monday, and that's where it should end.
Is there a risk, you kind of applied this in your ability to pay clause suggestion, is there a risk that this arbitrated settlement could end up being richer than the one that was ultimately turned down? In other words, it could be more costly in the end?
Well, the likelihood that the union is going to have turned down the settlement that their executive agreed to and have a strike like this only to satisfy themselves with something less doesn't seem very high. So whatever settlement an arbitrator arrives at is bound to be more expensive. And I'm simply saying that they should be taking into account the ability of the public just to go on paying and paying and paying through taxes or through the fare box. So the answer to your question is yes.
Do you suspect this will set a precedent for other, for police, fire, ambulance?
One of the other problems I had with the original settlement was the clause that sort of said that, no matter what anybody else did in the world, that these people, as hard as they work and as good as they are, were automatically entitled to a continuous escalation. I think we've just got to be careful that we don't sort of, keep saddling the taxpayers and people who use transit with endless additional bills. They can't afford to pay endless sums that go on and on. So I hope that that'll be taken into account in any event by the arbitrator, whether he's required to or she or not.
Should this legal right now be taken away from the TTC? Should they be declared, no matter what, an essential service so we don't have to go through this again?
We haven't gone through this very often, fortunately, and I have just said that issue, which is a big issue that has to do with collective bargaining rights and so on, should be left and should have been left from the beginning by the Premier and others until after we get this particular chapter closed, get the trains and buses running again, and have people know they have their transit.
But John, you got to look at it from the public's viewpoint. They look at the LCBO as an essential service, but the TTC isn't.
Well, the LCBO, they actually can have a strike, and I'm not sure a lot of people would categorize that as an essential service. I certainly wouldn't. People who have a problem might say it's an essential service. But the bottom line is these are serious matters. Obviously, the availability of transit to families and to the economy. The proper time to have that discussion is once we get the trains and buses running again and people know that their transit system is back in operation.
John, I understand that your office and either McGuinty's office or Bryant's office were in discussions through the evening and into the morning. Have you had discussions with the NDP at all about how this will work? I mean, because sometimes these things can get pretty delicate and tricky, and a whole, even something as simple as back to work legislation can fall apart on some kind of subclause or something. Is that?
We have not. Mr. Hampton, I gather, is going to come and speak with you in a few minutes, and he'll have to speak for himself. The government kept in good communication with us about their intention to pass the order, call the House back. They're making the bill available to us in advance, which is a good thing, so we can see it. And I would hope if there are some issues between 5:30 today and 1:30 tomorrow afternoon, we can deal with those issues and make sure that we get this thing passed as quickly as possible so the trains and buses will run again.
For members of the legislature, for MPPs who might not support the bill, even though we haven't seen it, what would that signify to you?
Well, it would perhaps signify they don't understand, the importance of the TTC on a weekday, and making sure that if there's going to be a strike like this, that it come to an end as quickly as possible. But look, we'll have to see what the bill says, and I'm confident tomorrow that all parties, as has been the case in the past, will end up supporting this and getting the TTC going again, which is what we all want to do.
Thanks, John.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. We've worked together before.
Well, that was Ontario Conservative Party leader John Tory speaking on the lawn of Queen's Park, reacting quickly to what has been very interesting 15 or 16 hours. He says that an order has been signed to bring the legislature back tomorrow at approximately 1:30. The rule requires 24 hours notice when he was asked why it wouldn't happen today. He also says that he and his party will do whatever they can to allow this legislation to pass swiftly. He brought up something called ability to pay, where an arbitrator would be brought in to look at that question, urging the government to do that, but it is not a deal breaker on this part. Otherwise, it gets too politically charged, and the focus is the back to work legislation, but they have suggested that this might be added to it, the ability to pay question, where an arbitrator makes that decision. Some had suggested that it be a clean bill of legislation so that the NDP will feel comfortable passing this as well. We're going to hear from Howard Hampton shortly. When asked, John Tory said that this quick strike, unannounced and leaving no time for preparation, TTC users, he said, quote, it will create a dramatic loss of confidence on the part of the public in the TTC. He doesn't think at this point that they should even talk about this, the TTC being made an essential service. He feels that we need to get the trains and buses and subways and streetcars running, and then this aspect of this whole big puzzle could be dealt with. He and his party will be looking at the back to work legislation at approximately 5:30 tonight, and the legislature sits at 1:30 tomorrow. We're waiting for Howard Hampton, the NDP leader, to I'm sure he's watching CP24. He knows John has stopped talking, and so Howard Hampton will be next up to the microphone, a swarm of press on Queen's Park lawn. So as soon as Howard Hampton begins to speak, we'll bring that to you live right here on CP24. Well, the TTC strike isn't only a problem for those who rely on transit, it's also bad for the air we breathe. For more on this, let's go live to CP24's Karen Lieberman on Queen Street. Yeah, you know, I guess increased car traffic, not good for air quality.
Absolutely, and it tends to be something that we don't really focus on, right? Because we're so, at this point, really focused on how we're going to get to the places we need to go, and we're thinking about just hopping into the car, and carpooling, of course, is really important as well. But, you know, without the subways, the streetcars, the buses, we rely on our cars. But I'm joined now by Ursilia Serafini of the Clean Air Foundation to talk more about this and what this TTC strike, what kind of effects it will have on pollution and the environment. So tell us why you're involved in this and you know, what's happening right now.
Well, Clean Air Foundation advocates for people to get out of old clunkers and into things like public transit and more sustainable transportation alternatives through our Car Heaven program. So displacing over 1 million riders a day through the shutdown of TTC service is going to have a really unfortunate side effect, which is going to be the environment and increasing greenhouse gases and smog-forming emissions into our environment.
We don't really have many choices at this point. We know that there are ways that we can, you know, all of us maybe pile into a car and, you know, carpool and that sort of thing. What else can we do in the meantime so that we can alleviate some of the pollution at least, right, and not maybe compound the problem?
Well, definitely encourage people to bike, carpool through, you know, sites like pickuppal.com, auto share. Definitely encourage people to do that. But if that's, you know, not an option and you need to drive your car, then look at other ways around your home that you can have an impact. Don't use a gas-powered lawnmower, for instance. Take it back this weekend to Home Depot. Get a push mower, get an electric. Don't compound the problem by using other products in and around your home that are also going to have a detrimental impact on our air quality. Use a clothesline. Don't use your dryer. Don't use conventional energy-sucking technology while something like the TTC strike is going on.
And it's really ironic because I know that you really do rely on the TTC like 1.5 million other commuters
right,
every single day. But today you had to drive your car.
That's right. And, you know, it's also ironic because one of the biggest green shows in
happening right now.
Province, in the country, is happening at the Direct Energy Center at the X right now, all focused on helping people get green. And I'm sure a lot of people plan to take the TTC to get there today to learn more and more tips about how they can.
I'm going to stop you right now. So that's a great idea. Lots of people can head out there and learn more. Definitely. Thanks so much. And that's it. You know what? We just have to be more conscious, I guess, of what we're doing these days.
All right, Karen, thank you very much. You're watching CP24. Our live, extensive coverage of the TTC strike continues. We're going to bring you the very latest on this strike as it becomes available. We're waiting to hear from NDP leader Howard Hampton next on his thoughts on the back-to-work legislation. Stay with us. The TTC is on strike. Premier Dalton McGuinty confirms he is recalling the legislature for tomorrow afternoon at 1:30 to deal with a sudden TTC strike. Now, the Premier has said he will move as quickly as possible to end the strike with back-to-work legislation after a request for that from Mayor David Miller. If the legislation is passed in time, buses, streetcars, and subways could be rolling again as early as Monday. Let's go live to Rabina for the latest at Queen's Park, and we're waiting for Howard Hampton, Rabina, to join us. We heard John Tory speak very clearly that he and his party are willing to support the legislation. They want to talk about the ability to pay. Let's see what Howard Hampton has to say about whether he and his party would support this.
Yeah, and I also I have John Tory with me right now. We're going to speak to him one-on-one. John, can you start by telling us, are you going to support this legislation? We just heard from you clearly that you are. Tell us.
Yes, we're going to see the legislation in a short while, but subject to there being some surprise in there, which I don't expect, we'll support the swift passage so we can get the trains and buses going again as soon as possible, certainly not later than before rush hour Monday morning.
Now, were you upset when you heard last night the TTC is stopped service? What was your first reaction?
I just thought it was a shocking act of irresponsibility to do it on the union's part, to do it without notice. You know, they have the right to strike. It's a legal strike, but they should have given people who are downtown and late at work on a Friday night some notice so that they could arrange to get home, maybe on transit. It wouldn't have made a difference if they'd given some notice to people. It was just inconsiderate, insensitive, and irresponsible. And, you know, it's done now, and it's just too bad because I think they lost a lot of support.
Just speaking to us right now, you repeatedly used the word outrageous. Can you tell us a little bit more? I mean, you just kept saying that it was outrageous that the way that this is all sort of panned out.
Well, I mean, I just think that the public end up as pawns in all of this, especially on Friday night. I mean, to be at your work or to be out at a club or a movie and just be in there minding your own business and not to know there was any chance whatsoever of a strike and then have people just withdraw their services without notice all of a sudden, it's just not the way this should work. They were right the first time when they said they would give 48 hours notice. Even if they'd given a bit less, but they'd given people some chance to mind their safety and to make some arrangements, I would have said, well, fine. But they didn't. And so I think that's shocking. And this whole thing, I mean, Mr. McGuinty has moved quickly to call the legislature back, but they didn't have a bill ready, and now they've scrambled to get one pulled together. They should be on top of this to a greater extent so that people know that the trains will be running and the buses as soon as possible. And that's what we'll try to do when the legislature sits.
What could McGuinty have done to be ready? I mean, what else could he have done?
Well, the least he could have done is have a bill ready. Now, as it turns out, that won't delay anything getting done tomorrow. The House will sit. It has to have 24 hours to sit notice, and it will sit tomorrow afternoon. And we can, we'll support the passage of the bill. Hopefully the NDP will, and it'll be done. But it's just the whole thing strikes you as a little bit sort of haphazard when it comes to something as important as the transit system.
Now, should there be any repercussions for this, the way that this was handled? Should anybody be held responsible for how quickly the buses were stopped? Now, I know it's a legal strike, but there has to be some, do you think there should be some repercussions?
I think the repercussion that will come is in the court of public opinion. I think the transit operators and drivers who people normally support, they're good people and they do a good job for us in Toronto. And I think they've lost a huge amount and, in terms of public respect and public confidence. And, that is probably the worst damage they can suffer, more so than people issuing bad statements or slapping their wrists. But it was just an irresponsible thing to do, and it's sad, but hopefully they'll learn a lesson from this.
1.5 million people, including myself, we rely on the TTC to get to work, get around. Do you think it should be an essential service? Should they be allowed to leave people just out on the streets 12 o'clock on Friday night?
I think we have to have a discussion about it, but I've suggested that discussion should not take place until this is dealt with, until we get the trains and buses running again. When you declare things an essential service, you turn all of the cost parameters over to an arbitrator. And arbitrators are free to award anything they want, and the taxpayers end up paying for it. So I think that's a dangerous thing just to say, sure, let's do that. So I think there should be a discussion, because people want to have it discussed, but I don't think it should happen now because I think we've got to focus on getting the trains and buses running again. That's what people really care about right now.
Can you say anything to put the minds of Torontonians at ease? How do you think that we're moving quickly enough on the provincial side to get things sorted out?
I think the legislature, by sitting on a Sunday afternoon, which is about as fast as it could because you have to give 24 hours notice, is indicating all parties. Mr. McGuinty moved. We immediately said we'd be there and support it. I hope Mr. Hampton says the same. I think by doing that, we've indicated that we understand how serious this is and that the idea will be to get the trains and buses going again as soon as possible, preferably sometime on Sunday, but certainly not later than the Monday time when people have to go to work.
How important is the TTC to Ontario?
Well, it's very important to Toronto, and Toronto is very important to Ontario, so therefore the TTC is important to Ontario. But, that's why it's important to get it going again, and that's why the legislature will sit on Sunday. So I think everybody understands how important it is, and certainly including members of the PC party, and I think all members of the legislature.
Okay, well, thank you very much for speaking to us. Thank you. Okay, and well, you heard it right from John Tory. They will support this legislation. They will try to get TTC workers back to work as soon as possible. And they feel that, the government has moved as quickly as possible, although he did mention a couple things about that they could have been more ready. They could have had the paperwork done.
Well, he said even in the press conference that he had legislation already written up, just in case, and he would have put it through as a private member's bill. So I guess the opposition always finds something critical. That's what their job is.
Well, exactly. They always have to sort of play devil's advocate. They have to look at the other side. That's what politics are, isn't it?
Absolutely. Well, I can't wait to hear from Ontario NDP leader Howard Hampton. He really is, the last cog in the wheel, if you will. We're wondering what he has to say about it. There has been some hope that the legislation is what's called clean legislation, so that the NDP feels that they can pass it if they feel comfortable with it. I gather that John Tory isn't looking at it until 5:30. Not sure why, but then the ledge sits tomorrow at 1:30. So lots of time to mull it over. Have you seen Howard? Is he milling about somewhere?
No, I haven't seen him. As you can see, I've been speaking to John Tory, but his press person has told me that he should be here. This was 5 minutes ago, and she said at that time 5 minutes. So any moment now, we're expecting Howard Hampton on the steps of Queen's Park.
All right, we'll go back to you as soon as he arrives. Thank you, Rubina.
Thank you, Anne.
And so to recap, there is a TTC strike. Queen's Park sources say Premier Dalton McGuinty will recall the legislature tomorrow to introduce back-to-work legislation. The union that represents 9,000 TTC operating and maintenance employees, voted down the tentative settlement by 65%. The Amalgamated Transit Union Local 113 has not yet announced plans for its next steps. Labour Ministry mediators have called on both sides to come back to the bargaining table this afternoon. Now, the TTC is saying that it will have limited service in place for those people who must attend medical appointments for things like chemotherapy and dialysis and other life-threatening illnesses. We're going to go back now live to Queen's Park. Ontario NDP leader Howard Hampton is going to be commenting very shortly about this back-to-work legislation that has just been crafted by the Liberals and will be looked at by both John Tory and by Howard Hampton. Let's go there live.
Sure. Thank you very much. Sure. Can I just step in a bit that way so that poor Enzo can get in there?
So Howard, are you give a statement or do you?
Yeah, look, we have not seen the legislation yet, and we're not going to make any comments until we do see the legislation. Furthermore, the union and management are still bargaining. I just made a call a couple of minutes ago. They're still at the table, and they're still trying to work things out. And the best agreements are the agreements that are worked out between the parties. So we want to see them continue to bargain. And we'll want to see the legislation.
Now, Howard, you're not going to give automatic passes. Is that what you're saying? You're not going to say automatically your bias is towards passing this?
No. It's irresponsible to say, "Oh, I'll pass some legislation" when I haven't seen the legislation.
Howard, see the legislation possibly today. Will you then make a decision today, before tomorrow?
We'll probably make a decision when we see the legislation.
Howard, I understand that the legislation, I haven't seen it yet either, but it's being crafted in such a way to be acceptable specifically to the NDP. There are apparently no clauses that, it's similar to the garbage strike legislation in the sense that it won't have anything that you guys would find unpalatable. Is that comforting to hear from your point of view? Or?
I spoke with the Minister of Labour earlier. He said, we'll do our best to get the legislation to you right away so you can have a look at it. We'll wait to have a look at it.
Well, what are the 6 o'clock then? Will we see you later? You're going to come out and tell us later today what you think, or are you going to wait till tomorrow?
Based upon what I've heard, I think bargaining is going to continue for a while. So I think we should.
Wasn't the question, Mr. Hampton? Will you let us know later today after you've seen the legislation whether you'll give unanimous consent to have it passed tomorrow?
I think we should let the parties bargain and try to address this. And once we have seen the legislation, we'll let you know how we feel about it.
The fact that hundreds of people were stranded across the city, do you support the idea what the transit union decided to do?
Look, these are difficult issues to sort out. I think the parties are doing the best they can to sort them out. And we should allow them some room today to hopefully sort this out.
So you don't think it's not necessary to do this then tomorrow?
Let's hope that we can get a bargained agreement. They're always the best agreements.
Will you leave the city in limbo again all night tonight? Will you leave the city in limbo tonight, even though you'll see the legislation today? Will you let us know today whether that's acceptable to you to have this transit system back to work Monday?
I think we should be patient and let the parties work this out as the best they can. And let's not try to prejudge anything.
You just said you want to see the legislation, Mr. Hampton. We're wanting to know when you're going to let us know what you think of it after you've seen it.
After we've seen the legislation, we'll let you know what we think of it. But let's not put the cart before the horse. I think there's still a good possibility here that we can achieve a negotiated settlement.
How long will you wait, though? How long will you wait? There are more than 1 million people who are relying on this service. You're saying to them, be patient. Maybe that's easy for you to say. How long will you wait before you agree to sit down in the legislature?
Well, the government's called the House back for tomorrow. That's going to happen, regardless.
And your position? How long will you let these negotiations continue?
After we see the legislation, we'll be happy to tell people what we think of it.
So this could go for days.
Howard,
this could go for days.
No, I've received a commitment from the minister that we'll see the legislation later on today.
Howard, you can't possibly think they're going to settle us. You can't possibly think they're going to settle us. They know that the back-to-work legislation is going to be happening. So the issue at hand is, when will we know whether the NDP will give unanimous consent? Will we know tonight, or will we know at 1:29 tomorrow?
And I'm saying, don't put the cart before the horse.
That is the horse. That is the cart. The cart and the horse are in a specific order right now, which is that there's back-to-work legislation being introdued tomorrow, and there's no hope of a settlement before then.
And the parties are at the table negotiating right now,
knowing that there's going to be back-to-work legislation. So why would they settle?
Why would they settle?
Because they're going to get a better arbitrated settlement right now.
No, because it's always in your best interest to settle your own agreement rather than having someone from outside impose one on you.
Unless you're an arbitrated settlement, you get a
Howard,
richer
what are
one.
the sorts of clauses in back-to-work legislation that the NDP would find objectionable? I mean, historically, there have been issues that you did not want to...
I'm not going to talk about that right now. Look...
Well, no, people want to know why you guys don't just say, "Well,
because I'm not going to buy a pig in the poke." That would be wrong. It would be really irresponsible to say, no matter what the legislation says, we're going to support it. Right? That would be terribly irresponsible to do that. We're simply saying, we'll see the legislation later on. We've got a commitment from the minister. In the meantime, I'm hopeful, because the parties are obviously hopeful. They're back at the table bargaining.
If you get the legislation in front of you today, will you come out later today and talk to us and tell all the people who use the TTC what your position is on it?
We'll keep you fully informed.
So that means we have a commitment. You have a commitment from the minister. Do we have a commitment that we'll see you later today after you've seen the legislation?
You'll see me later today.
After you've seen the legislation?
After you've seen the legislation.
Did they give you a timetable when you'd actually see the bill?
Oh, they said they'll get it to us as soon as they can.
So just to reiterate, legislature tomorrow?
Pardon me?
Will you be in the legislature?
I'll be there.
Just to reiterate one more time, for the hundreds of people who were stranded taking the TTC yesterday, do you think what the union did was an appropriate action? Do you support what they did last night?
Look, you bargain as best you can, all right? And you put your best good faith efforts forward. You can't always judge what the outcome is going to be. The parties are back at the table. They're trying their best to negotiate an agreement. And the best thing we can do is give them the time, and hopefully they'll be able to do that.
Howard, has the government been keeping you in the loop to your satisfaction in terms of the way this has been unfolding since sort of 11 o'clock last night?
I received a call last night saying they were proposing back-to-work legislation. That's the first I heard of it. I mean, to be honest, I think everyone has been a bit surprised by the turn of events.
Do you support declaring the TTC an essential service?
That's not an issue to talk about right now. That's an issue that it might be worthy of discussion at some other point. But right now, we've got a chance to settle this agreement, and I think that's where we should keep the focus.
At what point should we talk about essential service then?
Well, I think we should keep our eye on the ball here. Introducing other issues and other ideological or philosophical positions may actually get in the way of getting an agreement. Let's keep our eye on the ball. The parties are at the table. They're trying to get an agreement. If they can get an agreement, then that's in everyone's best interest. Let's keep our eye on the ball.
What's it like to have all this power right now? You guys are the linchpin here.
This is not about power. This is about trying to achieve a good result through a good process.
You'd have to agree, though, that you've got several members from Toronto. You've got a strong base in Toronto. Do you think your Toronto members would want to face the wrath of TTC people, TTC users who might have to not have their service for an extra day because you're holding up an appointed principle?
This is not about wrath. This is about giving people who are at the table now, in good faith, trying to find an agreement. And I think we should all give them some time to do that.
But you have to agree that there's serious pressure on you to get this thing through and get this thing settled.
I think the biggest pressure is on the parties. They'd like to find an agreement themselves.
But you're the kingmaker on this one, though.
This is not about kingmakers. This is about finding
people back on the bus.
This is about finding a good result and finding it through a good process. And so let the process unfold. People are at the table. They're working very hard. And let them try to work this out.
Have you had any discussions with any of the union leaders?
I've talked I've talked with some of those folks. I've talked with the Minister of Labour, and we've talked with some folks at the city.
What did you say to? Have you talked to Bob Kinnear?
Not directly to Mr. Kinnear at this point.
Anyone on the executive there, though?
We've talked to people who are talking with the executive.
What was your message to them?
Simply to say, hope you can find an agreement at the bargaining table. Let us know what the outstanding issues are.
Did you mention to them that people might have preferred 48 hours notice for this instead of being stranded last night?
Everybody would prefer that things unfold, as planned. But as we know, sometimes things don't unfold the way we want them to. And I think that's what happened here. I mean, the union executive bargained what they thought was a good agreement. And obviously there were some issues.
But this was an unusual union tactic. Have you, having said they would give 48-hour notice, yeah. I mean, did you sort of tell them that perhaps they might want to try using perhaps more conventional negotiating methods?
Well, I think, over the last few weeks, people have tried a variety of mechanisms at the bargaining table and in public to get to an agreement. And I'm still hopeful they will get to an agreement, or at least they'll resolve, all but a few of the issues.
So simply, what did you think of the union's tactic to do this at midnight?
When you're in a collective bargaining context and you're getting close to 0 hour, you can't always control the outcomes.
Do you support what they did then?
Look, you can't always control the outcomes. That's sometimes.
Did you support what they did then?
It's unfortunate when the public is inconvenienced. It is, but in these kinds of contexts, you can't always control the final outcome.
You can control the outcome whether the transit system goes back Monday morning or not. You have that right now, the ability to control that.
And right now, I'm hopeful that we'll get a bargain settlement, because a bargain settlement's always the best settlement. Because then no one can go around pointing fingers saying you did this to us or this was unfair to them.
Howard, when you were in government, you legislated the end to a transit strike. I mean, it's not an ideological thing. Governments of every political stripe have done it.
Yeah, and what you hope, though, is that the parties will be able to settle most of the issues themselves at the bargaining table. And I think that's where we're at right now. They would not be at the bargaining table if they didn't feel they could make some headway on a couple of issues.
They didn't have a choice. The Labour Ministry called them in. They didn't have a choice about being at the bargaining table.
Well, the fact that they're still at the table and they're still talking, I think, is a positive thing.
Are they at a table in the same room, or are they in two separate rooms?
No, I understand that they were in the same room earlier this morning.
Mayor Miller is urging you to support back-to-work legislation. If this is a clean bill, can you give him any sort of reassurance that you will do all you can to push this bill?
The best thing we can do is allow the parties to continue to negotiate. After I've seen the legislation, I'll let you know what I think of it.
Do you think Mr. Kinnear has lost control of his own union?
That's not for me to say. I don't think that's an issue right now.
Well, you're a Labour lawyer. I mean, you understand things like this more than most of us. Given what you can see from the outside, I would think you'd be able to make a pretty good judgment on that.
Well, obviously, there must be an issue or a couple of issues that some members of the bargaining unit feel strongly about.
Howard, how long would it take?
Last question.
How long would it take process-wise to get this passed?
That's a what if.
Very important what if, though.
No, I think the most important what if right now is what if they can bargain a settlement this afternoon.
But it's just a question of the rules. I was wondering. Yeah. Can you hold it up? I'm under the impression you can only put it one day if you chose to.
Look, let's let the parties bargain in agreement.
No, I understand. I'm not asking you whether you're going to support it or not. Just your understanding of the rules are how long could a third party delay this if they chose to?
We're nowhere near that. We're at a point where the parties are at the table, they're bargaining, and the best thing any of us can do would be to try to promote a bargain settlement.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you later. We'll see you later.
Well, that appeared to be a real game of cat and mouse with Ontario NDP leader Howard Hampton and the press of Toronto. What an interesting little bit of information that came out there. Howard Hampton saying that no comments will be made until he sees the legislation. He also said, by virtue of a phone call to his sources, that he can confirm that the union and management are still bargaining. He says that he would always prefer to see a negotiated settlement rather than a legislated settlement. In other words, when pressed several times, he said, I'm not going to make a comment until I see the legislation. When asked point blank by one of the members of the press, can you give us a commitment that we will see you later today with a comment, he finally said yes. Others suggesting that he has a little bit of power that he didn't have before and that he might be exercising that power. He is really the linchpin in all of this. He scoffed at that, poo-pooed that, but he absolutely said that he will take a look at the legislation and see whether it suits the purposes of the party and the mandate of the party, and he will let the press know, which means we'll let you know what Howard Hampton thinks later on today after he has seen the legislation. The Ministry of Labour has committed to sending him a copy and the party as well. Keep it right here on CP24 for the non-stop drama that is this TTC strike leading up to it, the strike that was called suddenly last night at midnight, and all of the fallout today that is just just incredible. We will have non-stop updates on this TTC strike. Coming up in 1 minute, we'll check traffic in Toronto and the weekend weather forecast. Remember, CP24 is the only place for your non-stop updates on the TTC strike.